Chapter 6. Harry chose to ignore Remus's words. Even when Sirius agreed with the werewolf, he had to agree with Remus, right? They were a couple after all. And did Malfoy know about that? Would he still be polite once he found out? Harry wasn't so sure, but he didn't want to test it by telling him. Instead, he continued ignoring the other boy, who in turn continued to lock himself in his room. Tonks was pretty much the only one he willingly spent time with. Harry was surprised when he actually found the two of them laughing together once. He realized with a start that he'd never really seen Malfoy laugh before. Wearing an evil smirk or gloating at something, sure, but laughter? He hadn't known the blonde was capable of that. It was promising to become a very dull and boring summer, at least until the Weasleys and Hermione would arrive, which wasn't for almost another 3 weeks. Sirius and Remus were often busy with work for the Order, and the other Order members usually only came by for short visits. Tonks now spent a lot of time with Malfoy when she was there, so Harry resigned himself to spending most of the next 3 weeks alone, but it all changed one evening, about a week into the holiday. Harry was trudging up the stairs after dinner. There was going to be a meeting in the kitchen, which meant he had to get back to his room. Much as he still hated it, he was still not allowed to attend Order meetings. Sirius might have caved, but Dumbledore refused, and no one seemed to dare to go against his orders. Walking past Draco's room, which was slightly ajar, Harry was stopped by a sniffling sound. The blonde had left the dinner table early, after Andromeda had shown up asking to talk to him. She had visited him yesterday, but Harry had no idea what either visit was about. Andromeda was downstairs with the other adults now. She had looked grave upon returning to the kitchen. Hesitating slightly, he finally decided to investigate and pushed Draco's door open further, glancing inside. What he saw made him stop dead in his tracks. Malfoy was lying on his bed, head buried in his pillow, sobbing violently. Harry stared at him in shock and debated with himself. The other boy hadn't noticed his presence yet, so he could sneak into his own room and pretend he'd never seen him. Malfoy wouldn't take too kindly to being seen in this state. That much was for sure. But his sobs tore at Harry's heart, and before he knew what he was doing, he had already taken a few steps into the room. "Malfoy?" he whispered hesitantly, causing the blonde to freeze. Slowly, he lifted his head from the pillow and glanced at Harry. "What do you want, Potter?" It was clear that he was aiming for the familiar sneer, but with his face covered in tear tracks and his voice hitching, he sounded rather pitiful. What happened?" Malfoy sat up, wiping at his eyes, trying in vain to compose himself. Harry was surprised that he hadn't been thrown out yet and expected the other boy to start yelling any second, but it looked like Malfoy was too distressed to be an ass right now. My mother, she's been taken to St. Mungo's," he whispered brokenly, not meeting Harry's gaze. The dark-haired boy sucked in a shocked breath and cautiously went further into the room, stopping next to the bed. "Is she sick? Will she be all right?" The blonde sniffled again. "She's hurt. Broken rib, ruptured spleen, and some other injuries. She claims she fell down the stairs. Healers say she'll be fine in a few days," he replied in a hollow voice. "Oh, I'm sorry. It was an accident then?" Harry asked, not sure what else to say. He could only guess how awful the other boy must be feeling, knowing his mother was badly hurt and unable to even visit her, and strangely enough, he wanted to comfort Draco. Awkwardly, he sat down next to him on the bed, half expecting the blonde to shove him off. He wasn't expecting the cruel, mirthless laugh coming from Draco. "No, Potter, it was no accident," he spat, angrily wiping at his eyes again when fresh tears leaked out. Harry wanted to look away, but he found he couldn't. Draco looked so heartbroken and so lost. It took a moment for the implication of the words to sink in. "You think she was attacked? But why wouldn't she say so?" Finally, Draco looked at him. His eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "Because the one who did this to her was my father," he snapped. Are you sure?" Harry asked in shock. "Yes, I'm sure. Not like this is the first time he obviously found out she was meeting with Andromeda in secret, that she asked her to bring me some things from home and that she got money from the Gringotts vault for me, so he punished her for helping me. He punished her for my disobedience." The sentence ended with a choked sob, and he quickly turned his head away. Harry's mind was reeling. He'd always thought that Malfoy was a spoiled brat who'd had a perfect childhood, but from the sounds of it, he'd been horribly wrong. Did he hit your mother often?" he dared to ask, shuddering when the blonde simply nodded. "Did he hit you as well?" He couldn't help himself. He just had to know. Draco was quiet for a long time, and Harry was starting to wonder if he'd even heard the question, when he finally answered in a small voice. "Not as often as her. Mother she protected me from his wrath, made sure he mostly took his anger out on her, but he yelled at me all the time, and..." He stopped abruptly and turned to glare at Harry. Why do you even care? Get out of my room! The dark-haired boy blinked in surprise at the sudden outburst. But Malfoy, he argued, only for the other boy to push him off the bed. Caught by surprise, Harry ended up on the floor. I said get out, Potter! Draco yelled at him. Fine, be a prat. What do I care? He shouted back, getting up and heading to his own room, shaking his head at Malfoy's weird mood swings. The whole thing felt surreal to Harry. He couldn't believe that he actually felt sorry for his rival, but he did, and weirdly enough he wanted to comfort Malfoy, who had looked so broken. Hearing the blonde admitting to his troubled childhood had made him realize that maybe they weren't as different as he had always thought, and it did explain a lot about Malfoy's behavior. Still, he decided to forget the incident and act like nothing had happened. Malfoy's angry outburst had shown clearly that he felt no desire to bond with Harry over mutual bad childhood experiences. By the next morning, the cool and collected mask was back on, and Malfoy pointedly ignored him during breakfast. Harry was sure that he would continue to do so for the rest of the summer. Therefore, he was totally surprised when the blonde once again came to his room later that day. They were alone in the house, and for a moment, Harry wondered if the older boy had decided to use the absence of any order members to hex him or something. But Draco made no move to reach for his wand. He just stood there, eyes downcast, looking lost and even a bit scared. Thanks for not telling your godfather to check me out, he blurted finally. Harry blinked at him in surprise, until he realized that Malfoy was referring to his outburst from last night. I wouldn't ask Sirius to throw you out just because you yelled at me, he assured. Malfoy looked genuinely surprised, and Harry almost wanted to punch him. What did the guy think of him? Only the worst, obviously, which he proved by sneering. So I guess you think I'll leave on my own, if you just mock me long enough, huh? Have you already sent an owl to Weasley and Granger gloating over my misery? Invited them to join in on the fun? I haven't told them anything. I talked to no one about what you said last night, Harry growled through gritted teeth, barely reining in his temper. Draco just gave him a disbelieving look. I may not like you, but I would never use the fact that your father abused you against you, the dark-haired boy felt compelled to say. Don't make me out to be some bloody victim, Potter. The poor boy who got beaten by his father. I don't need your pity, Draco spat, glaring at Harry. I won't, and this is not pity. I know what it feels like, okay? Harry yelled back, absently wondering why their encounters always ended in a shouting match. Once the words sunk in, Malfoy's anger deflected. For what felt like an eternity, they both simply stood there, breathing harshly, staring at each other. Harry could even understand the other boy to some extent. He had seen him at his most vulnerable. Draco's pride was hurt immensely, and judging by what he knew of Slytherins, he was waiting for Harry to use that knowledge against him. Despite the fact that they had hated each other since first year, the younger boy felt the need to make it better, even if it meant sacrificing a bit of his own pride. Remus had asked him to give Draco a chance after all. You know that I grew up with my Muggle relatives, right? When the blonde nodded, he slumped down on the bed and went on. Well, they hated magic. They hated anything out of the ordinary, so naturally they hated me. And whenever something unusual happened, they blamed me and punished me for it. They never told me I was a wizard. I had no idea what I had supposedly done wrong, and they wouldn't explain. They never explained anything. It didn't matter to them. My uncle just yelled at me all the time, at least when he wasn't ignoring me. Sometimes they hit me, and they made me skip dinner to punish me. Draco shuffled closer and sat down on the bed cautiously, like he was afraid Harry might push him off. The thought did cross the younger boy's mind, but he decided against it. Now wasn't the time for petty revenge acts. They sound horrible, the blonde muttered. They are. I didn't even have my own room or a real bed for 10 years. They made me sleep in a cot in a cupboard under the stairs, and I had to wear my cousin's old clothes because I didn't want to spend money on me. The first thing Sirius did when I was finally allowed to move in with him was take me shopping. Harry let him know, surprised how good it felt to finally tell someone, even if that someone was his arch-nemesis. Mother always spoiled me, Draco admitted hesitantly. She bought me everything I wanted. I think it was her way of making up for Father. Harry looked at him in surprise, not having expected a confession like that, or any kind of confession, actually. He hit you? He muttered quietly, not wanting to set Draco off again, but not wanting him to stop talking either. It was probably the first time they had actually had a somewhat normal conversation. Sometimes, yes, the blonde whispered. He once broke my wrist when I was 5. We had taken a walk through the park after meeting some of his friends, and I had talked to a Muggle girl. He grabbed me by the wrist and dragged me away, and he has a very firm grip, you know? Then I had to listen to a speech about how Muggles were filthy and beneath us for almost an hour before he allowed my mother to take me to a healer. Remembering all the times Uncle Vernon had dragged him around, leaving purple bruises on thin arms, Harry felt the sudden urge to reach out and hug Malfoy. Before he could decide whether or not to give in to that urge, the older boy got up, suddenly feeling awkward again. I should go. He was almost at the door when Harry called him back. Malfoy? The blonde gave him a questioning look, his posture rigid, like he was waiting for a jibe. Harry couldn't explain it, but he didn't want him to leave, so he blurted the first thing that came to mind. How about a game of wizard chess? Remus said I could borrow his set. Perhaps he imagined it, but he thought Malfoy looked relieved. Maybe he was tired of being all alone as well, tired of always fighting. Yeah, okay, he agreed with a shrug, before a smirk spread over his face. I hope you're prepared to lose, Potter. The jibe held no heat, so Harry grinned back. We'll see about that, Malfoy. Of course, Harry did lose, spectacularly at that. At least Draco didn't gloat like Ron usually did. He even offered a rematch. They were in the middle of their third game when Remus came to fetch them for dinner. He looked pleasantly surprised to find them together. Since there were no other Order members this time aside from Tonks who had shown up for dinner, Sirius regaled them with stories about their adventures at Hogwarts. Remus injected little comments here and there, but seemed mostly content to listen to his boyfriend, who had the other three laughing nonstop. And then Filch burst into the room, with McGonagall in tow, and James and I were standing there under the invisibility cloak, trying to not make a sound, and I swear McGonagall looked straight at us. I thought we were done for when Moody saved our hide by tripping Ernie Wittershins out in the corridor. Ernie crashed into a suit of armor, and the noise was all the distraction we needed to get away. Remus smiled innocently. I told you, I didn't trip him. He stumbled. It was an accident. A very fortunate accident, he insisted, eliciting another round of laughter. Tonks promptly fell off her chair, the second time that night, so no one batted an eyelash. Harry looked over at Draco, once again surprised how different the blonde looked when he was laughing. He'd only ever seen Malfoy tense, sneering, or wearing an evil smirk, and after all he'd learned today, he thought he knew why. However, Draco's usual haughty arrogance was gone now, and he looked relaxed. They shared a small smile before concentrating on Sirius, who had already started the next tale. I think Harry and Draco are actually starting to get along, Remus commented later that night, crawling into bed next to Sirius. You could be right about that, the Animagus agreed, pulling him closer. And you're okay with that? Yes, I think I am. Weird as it is, I actually feel sorry for Draco, Sirius admitted. I never paid him much attention in the past. He was just Lucius' son, you know? A Death Eater in the making. And of course, Harry sometimes complained about him, typical Malfoy, I thought. But hearing from Andromeda what kind of monster Lucius really is, and what he did to the poor boy, he trailed off, staring into the darkness of their bedroom. Any news about Narcissa? Remus asked quietly. She's obviously healing well. Andromeda said they'll probably release her tomorrow, send her back to the man who got her into St. Mungo's in the first place, Sirius replied bitterly. We can't help her if she doesn't let us. We can't kidnap her, Badfoot. She needs to make the decision to leave him herself, his boyfriend reminded. I know, I just wish we could do more. It's tearing Andromeda apart not being able to help her sister. Remus pulled the other man into his arms. The only thing we can do for her right now is to take care of her son, and I think we're doing a good job with that. You really think so? He still flinches away every time I try to touch him, Sirius mumbled. Give it time. He's been through a lot. He needs to learn to trust again. At least he's no longer cowering in fear whenever someone sets off your mother's portrait. That's progress. And he actually laughed tonight in case you didn't notice. It'll take a while for him to feel safe around us. I think at least he's starting to open up to Harry. Neither of them knew exactly what Harry's childhood had been like. He hadn't told them much, and they hadn't wanted to pry. But gathering from the few things he had said and what they knew of the Dursleys, they could hazard a pretty good guess. Maybe it would help both boys to talk about their experiences, and if they bonded while doing so, even better. If Harry and Draco became friends, it would be all the more incentive for Draco to stay on their side in the coming war.